Over the past 20-something years of doing this chastity ministry, I've kind of lost track at this point of how many emails I've received from married couples wrestling with pornography. And they're going through these cycles of, just the despair of discovering that one of the spouses is looking at this stuff. And then, followed by, a period of distance and then maybe forgiveness and a moment of hope and a dawn is coming and we're starting over. And then the wound is open again and more mistakes happen. And, they want to love the spouse rightly, but, or do we need an annulment? Do we need marital counseling? Should I just give up on this guy? Is this ever going to change? And heartbreaking stuff. I was speaking in Colorado a few weeks ago and a man told me, he was a priest. He said one of his relatives was a 30-something-year-old dad, got a knock at the door, open up the door, and it's the police. And the police that were there to arrest this guy. And he's a husband and a father of a 12-year-old girl. And, why are you arresting me? And they said, well, we've seen what you were looking at online. And one of the girls you looked at was a 17-year-old woman, not 18 years old. And he said, well, I didn't know she wasn't 18. I said, well, that's not going to stand up in court. They arrested the guy. And as we speak, he's sitting in a jail cell somewhere while his 12-year-old girl is going to go through the next 5 years of her life without a father. So many couples are in a heartbreaking situation of pornography. And a lot of times they feel hopeless and wonder, how do I connect with people in the church without just feeling ashamed? Is there anyone I can trust? Am I the only one going through this? Well, today we're going to have a couple who has gone through this battle, the good times, the bad, the sickness, the health. And they're going to share just kind of a ray of hope that, it is possible. They've created a program to help married couples finally, once and free, break free from the pornography and how to go through that and how to rebuild trust and hope again. And so before we bring them on, I again want to thank all of our patrons who make this podcast at Lust is Boring possible. So just big shout out to you guys. Thank you guys for your commitment, your month-to-month gift. If you do want to support the podcast, you just click the link in the show notes for Patreon, and you can help us out there to keep this thing rolling. Also want to thank another one of our sponsors, which is Hallow. If you're a married couple, this is an awesome app for you just because not only do they have novenas that you can do for your family, for your marriage, they even got dating novenas if you want to try that. They've got an app section for the kids there. So if you want to drive to school, pop in some prayers for the kids and let the app automate that prayer for the family and lead that. They've got all kinds of content. So just want to encourage you to go to hallow.com/lustisboring. You can try this thing out for free. And it's just a perfect companion of the interior life to have right there on your phone. And then lastly, again, our pilgrimage is wide open to the Holy Land this summer in June, and then late July, we're going to be heading to Poland. Both of those trips with Father Agostino Torres to walk in the footsteps of Christ, or St. John Paul II, St. Maximin Kolbe, St. Faustina. And so consider taking a vacation with your family, maybe your spouse, bring the teens. Both are going to be life-changing experiences. You can just go to chastity.com, and you'll see the ad right there for the pilgrimages, or you can click the link in the show notes. And so with that having been said, Brandon and Tonia Clark were married in 2014. They live up in Minnesota. They've been blessed with a beautiful 10-month-old daughter not too long ago. And Brandon works for Covenant Eyes. You've heard me promote Covenant Eyes countless times on this program, but they've got a new initiative there called Restored Vows that he's going to help us to understand the gift of that. And they're going to share today just the struggles of what it's like with pornography in marriage, before marriage. Is there hope? How do you break free and find that marriage that both of you had always wanted from the get-go? And so, Brandon and Tonia, thank you for coming with us on the program today.
Thanks, Jason. It's great to be on. We both have followed your work for a long time, and just want to thank you for everything that you do as well. It's really important to our church, to our young people, and even us as we talk about chastity and marriage. It doesn't stop when you get married.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you guys, just your vulnerability, willing to get out there, just put your faces out there. Because, every single parish, there are so many couples of the good families going there to Sunday Mass that are wrestling with this. And they think, I must be the only one in this church. Because all those other couples, their kids look so nice and well-dressed, and they look so in love, and we must be the only ones. But so thank you guys just for your openness to share this. Maybe start with you, Brandon. What's your story? How did this all get started?
Yeah, so it goes back to when I was 12 years old, and I was at my friend's house in the basement, and there was a computer there, and we were just goofing off on the computer. And my friend at one point said, "Hey, do you want to see something?" And I thought, being a young kid who had never been exposed to anything, that this was going to be something pretty cool. And so I said, "Yeah, sure, why not?" And it ended up being an image, and I didn't even recognize it right away when he pulled it up. I was so taken aback at what I was seeing because it was a naked woman. And again, I had never been exposed to anything like that. And so I, I was just caught in, I don't know, limbo of like, what is this? Is this a good thing? Is this not a good thing? And, what happens next?
Mhm.
And so when I did realize what it was, that it was a naked woman, my brain was like, it went into overdrive. I think that's the best way to describe it. I just wanted to see more and more and more because it was also new and exciting, and I didn't know that it was wrong. And so as we continued to click on, image after image after image, soon it included men who were doing things with these women. And because I had never had a talk up to that point with my parents about the gift of our sexuality or anything, I had to kind of piece two and two together that this is what sex was. And it wasn't long then after that when I went home, I discovered videos. And so this was no longer just still images. This was this action taking place. And again, my brain, it was just like the best way I think I could describe it was like a sponge. I just wanted to take more and more in as much as possible. And, I just kind of dove further into it day after day, sometimes multiple times a day looking at it because it was so, intriguing and so desiring to the eyes. And, before I knew it, by the age of 13, I was looking at pornography, and I had discovered masturbation at that point, and it was a daily occurrence. So I really fell into a pornographic trap at my friend's house, and I didn't realize the damage and destruction that it would cause over the next 16 years.
So I would imagine that, when you started dating Tonia, you were still in the midst of all this, maybe realizing it's wrong, but not knowing how to break free.
Yeah, so by the time I hit middle school, early high school, I was involved in a Catholic organization that put on youth retreats in the local diocese, and I had come across an examination of conscience, and I discovered the commandments, the sixth and ninth commandments, I believe they are, talking about adultery, and what I realized was that the that pornography and masturbation were mentioned in those. And so it was really eye opening to me. I went to confession right away, thinking that that would be it, that it would stop there. But it didn't. So fast forward through college and into the dating relationship after college with Tonia. And yeah, I knew it was wrong, but I was stuck. I couldn't do it on my own. And I had a lot of pride. Not that I don't have pride still, but I had a lot of pride in thinking that I could take control of the situation and break free myself by not having any help or telling anyone about it. But I was very wrong.
Yeah, and then Tonia, like how and when did you find out? What was that like?
It was kind of interesting. I'm kind of more of a straight shooter type anyway, so I had known a few of his girlfriends that he had dated before, and so I had done some background checking on him. And so through that I found that they knew that he had used pornography. And so before we started dating, I asked him that just point blank, have you ever looked at porn? And I already knew the answer, but I wanted to know if he would be honest and open with me. So he said yes. And so I was like, okay, but I didn't understand to what level. I had been in ministry for a few years before that, and so I knew that pornography was a thing that guys struggled with. I knew that lust, was a cross that they bore in a way that I didn't as a female. So I was aware that it could be a thing, but I didn't know to what extent at all.
And then were you both kind of thinking, well, dating will change it, and then when that didn't work, well, marriage will change it. Did you kind of buy into that mentality that it would solve the issue if you just kind of moved deeper into commitment?
To some extent, I think when he admitted it, I was like, oh, well, admitting it's half the battle, right? That's 50%. This other 50% should be easy. No big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, when I started dating her, she was different than any other girl I had dated. And so I really wanted to not struggle with it in dating. And there was a moment where we were dating, and I was picking her up to go to daily mass, and I had fallen the night before, and something in my heart said I needed to mention it, and so I did when she got in the car. And I remember she hit her hand on the dash pretty hard because she was really upset, and she got out of the car and went into her apartment and would not open the door for anything. And I thought, okay, well, I just lost her. But then she ended up having a conversation with her brother, who explained a few more things about the struggle, and we continued to work through it. I had wanted to stop, but I just couldn't. And I did, yes, fall into that trap of, okay, well, we get through dating and engagement, marriage, that'll change everything. Because, of course, we can fully, you know, go into the conjugal embrace, right? Have sex and not have any issues at that point, right? Because I had this idea in my head that maybe the reason I was struggling so much is because I couldn't actually act any of it out. And so when I got married, sex would take care of it, and being married to her.
Yeah, no, I find that to be an extremely common presumption that, and somehow marriage will be the fulfillment of porn, instead of the realization that the porn is the distortion of human love. Because, if porn is training you in a sense of mental polygamy, it's just training you to never be satisfied. It's kind of robbing you of the capacity to be captivated by the one. And so when you get the one, it's not like oh, all of a sudden now it's three-dimensional instead of two-dimensional. Now I've been given this gift of monogamy and fidelity. In my imagination, it doesn't happen. And so when the falls start to happen in marriage, Tonia, there's the term that's used of sexual betrayal trauma. And I think a lot of wives, when they find their husband's porn stash or whatever, a lot of times get gaslighted into thinking you're overreacting. I'm not actually cheating on you. I'm not having an affair with my secretary. I'm not as bad as this guy. It's just a little slip up. Guys have desires. We have issues. Calm down, chill out. You're overreacting. And so this idea that she's experiencing this wound, this trauma, is he's trying to make her think she's crazy at the meantime. And so she's kind of stuck in this headspace and feeling so alone and not wanting to tell her girlfriends, because then she feels like she's betraying him. Could you maybe speak to a moment of just the validity of that the sexual trauma, of what that is, that betrayal trauma, and then any encouragement that you would give to a woman who's going through that right now and watching this?
Yeah, for sure. I think when Brandon he admitted to me for the first time that he had fallen, he was not he did not gaslight at all. Yeah. He almost played the opposite card. I am so sorry. Oh, well, to a woman's heart, that's exactly what I needed to hear. I needed to hear that you were sorry. It didn't change though, but it bought him enough time until the next fall. For a little while. Nothing changed. The do didn't happen. He didn't make any, he'd get some things on the Covenant Eyes on his phone and, and make it look like he was making up a pretty good pretense to try this and try to be proactive. But it just didn't stick. And so it was almost the opposite of gaslighting, but maybe gaslighting in a twisted sense, kind of like well, he keeps saying he's sorry, so he must be sorry. But when the action doesn't follow, I just remember at a certain point in our relationship, sorry didn't cut it anymore. Yeah. And I just remember one time he's like, I'm so sorry. And I just looked at him and I had zero emotion. I'm like, I know, you always are. And I was dead cold. I was like, dude, nothing's changing. In fact, sometimes it's worse. So this isn't happening the way you're thinking it is. So yeah, no, but I remember playing some of those mental games within myself, constantly cutting him slack in my own head. Okay, guys struggle with this. This is a thing. Everybody says that guys struggle with this. So I was constantly questioning myself interiorly. And then with I'm so sorry, I'm going to try this, I'm going to try that. It was always something on his own. And I was always like, okay, he said he's sorry. It just it spun out of control. It didn't get any better. I think the behavior was acted out in a different way. Not necessarily so much that directly in the porn, but he'd take it on me in other ways. And I would get, I suppose you could say, victimized by gaslighting in other ways. things that he wouldn't. He'd get angry over little things and get super controlling over little things, but they would eventually go back to the porn. Just behaviors that were triggering behaviors that I was like, oh my gosh, you're acting just like an alcoholic, because that was the only kind of experience I'd ever had with addiction. I'm like, what's going on? So a lot of those activities that were more of the not direct, they were indirect, but they were linked. So it was tough.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like almost like the survival of your marriage depended upon the extent to which you were willing to have your heart be a doormat. And that as long as you're willing and to be walked on again and again and again, then the marriage could stay intact. And if you were going to quit that, then the marriage would implode. So it puts all this weight upon you. So like, Brandon, when did things finally kind of hit rock bottom?
Yeah, so like you were talking about at the beginning, that light of hope, right? That things could change. I went for 19 months at one point without looking at pornography, and things were getting a lot better. But I had also built some good habits, like developing a daily prayer life and, working on communication and everything like that. And I got really comfortable because things were going really well. And what I ended up doing then was falling away from my prayer life. I'd pray, a few times a week, and then maybe once a week. And then while I'm talking to the Lord throughout the day, so that's good. I wasn't getting that dedicated prayer time in, that time to recharge and just embrace the love of God. And it happened one day that I think I was even at work, and I fell after 19 months. And I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that I had fallen. And it ended up being a few days before we were going to go on a trip to Duluth, Minnesota. And I hadn't told Tonia that. And so we got in a fight on the Duluth trip, kind of old time fighting, because we had gained a lot of ground just in our relationship in those 19 months. But we had gotten into a fight, and I had followed her out. And I think she could actually tell this best, actually. For what happened next, and I could kind of fill in, just my feelings at that point. So
sure. And we had, like I said, we had made some headway in our relationship up to that point, but there was still some pretty major disconnect. We were living kind of a singles lifestyle. We were both working really hard and building a house and stuff like that. So there was a lot going on. We were still dealing with the anger and behavior issues that would be connected with the addiction, but when we went to Duluth, I was like, oh, good, this will be a great connection point. We're within the safety zone of my family. We can't get in an out-and-out fight there. Somehow we did. We still managed to get in an out-and-out fight over something small again. And I kind of, when that same trigger was pulled, I was like, uh-oh, I wonder if he fell. Like immediately in my brain, I just put it together. I was like, and I just kind of experienced like, I don't know, where you just kind of like freak out inside, and I had to get away from him. Like, I just had to get away. Like, I was being attacked, in a sense. He wasn't my husband anymore. He was an attacker, and I needed to be able to breathe. I was being, like, emotionally suffocated. Like, so I left. It was late at night. It was on the docks, and I left the RV and went for a walk because I needed to cool down, and I needed to get away from him. And he followed me out. He was pretty much right behind me, not too far behind, and he was yelling at me across the dock. And I just remember shaking. I was scared that he'd find me, interiorly, but exteriorly, I was like, oh, I gotta put your tough girl on. Like, it was just ethereal. It was like an out-of-body experience. And he kept following me, and the only way I knew to seek kind of a solace was in a nearby hotel. So I walked into the hotel, and I walked up to the desk, and I'm trying not to cry. I'm trying to control my emotions, and I'm asking the hotel clerk if I can get a hotel room. And he immediately kind of put on these sad eyes, and he's like, honey, how are we going to pay for that? Oh my gosh, I lost it. I started crying and like shaking, and I was probably getting pretty close to hysterical. And the clerk looked at me and he said, do you need me to call the cops? It was like he knew what was going on. And again, going back to what you were saying, like nobody needs to know about our problems, right? Maybe he really means it this time. After how much we had been through, there was still a part of my heart that was like, well, maybe he means it this time. What am I gonna do? So I'm like, no, it's fine. And they're like, we don't have any rooms. We're full up. We could tell they were trying for us, and they just didn't have any rooms. So we walked out of the hotel, and I just didn't even know what I was gonna do. I was drowning, and then the lights showed up. And 2 cop cars pulled up. And I remember just like a flood of relief. And all I prayed was, dear Lord, thank you and bless whoever it was that called the cops. Like, I was so thankful that there was like a glimmer of humanity. Somebody saw my pain and tried to help. So that was totally relieving for me. I felt safe. And yeah, that was kind of how it was for me.
Yeah, so, we walk outside the hotel and you're not expecting cops to show up, right? We said we didn't, I said that we didn't need them. And so I thought things were settled, and yet he called anyway. And when I saw the cops show up, my heart sank. And I didn't know what was going to happen, honestly. I didn't know if I was going to spend the night in jail. Like, I was scared. And I had felt like I had hit rock bottom. I remember thinking, this is it. This is rock bottom. This is where things end. I'm probably going to lose my marriage here. And I don't know where things are going to go from here. And it was so humbling to have to explain what happened to the cop. And I think by God's mercy, he just told us, you know what, you guys need to go your separate ways tonight. If you're going to sleep in the same room, I don't want you talking to each other, and, get a good night's sleep, and, let a new day come. But I don't want you talking to each other, because if I have to show up here again, things aren't going to be good. And so that was a really humbling point. And at that time, Tonia had gone back into where we were staying, and I called my friend, and he told me about this program called Retrovi, which was for hurting marriages. And he had said, you should just go, because you can help get, the tools you need to just learn how to communicate, even if your marriage really isn't on the rocks or anything like that. And I'd always kind of put on the happy face that, oh no, we're fine, we don't need it, even though there were major problems boiling up underneath. And that night, I gave him a call. I said, we really do need to go to Retrovi, because I think I'm about to lose my marriage. And so that was really, it should have been the eye-opening moment. It was partly eye-opening. And yeah, I'll never forget that.
Yeah. So now you go on the retreat together, and, what happens at that point? I mean, you can kind of hit rock bottom. Is there like an ultimatum, like, this is the end of the line, like if it ever happens again it's over? Like, where do you go at that point?
So we went on the retreat, and we got to the tools that they talked about, and we were starting to use them. I had pushed for a clean slate on that retreat. The past is past, so let's begin again. So I had thought in my head that meant the past just doesn't matter anymore. It's time to move on, a clean slate. And I was really taken aback when she said, I can't just clean slate it. I can't just wipe away all the pain and all the hurt from the past 4 years like it never even happened. And so she was really struggling with that. And so things went really well on the weekend, but then there's follow-up sessions, post sessions, and we would get in a couple big fights in between. And there was one time where we got in a fight in the evening, and that's when an ultimatum came. And I should back up and fill in a little bit. At this point, Jason, we're in the middle of 6 years of infertility. And so, there's another layer to this, that every time I would fall, I was spilling seed on the ground that could have potentially led to a child. And so we had set up to work with an organization called Pope Paul VI Institute in Omaha, Nebraska. They're fantastic, and they've had a lot of success in helping couples work through infertility. And we hit a point one night then that I was given the ultimatum that I either needed to get help or move out. And this was what, weeks before we were about to head to Omaha. And so I had thought that Duluth was the rock bottom moment until that moment came. Because at that point it was, I don't want to be in the same room with you anymore. I want you to move out. And I had no idea if the Omaha trip was going to happen, which meant, are we ever going to be able to have kids? Are we ever going to be able to move forward and realize this opportunity if we don't go and take care of these situations? So all of this was laid out, and all of this, it looked like, if you've ever been on a beach and you've held sand in your hand and it just kind of slips out, that's really what it felt like in that moment. Was the sand was slipping through my hand, and pretty soon I had nothing left. And that's when I really felt like I was face down on the floor, licking the dirt, that it really couldn't go any lower because I was basically about to lose my marriage.
Yeah. So from that rock bottom spot to where you guys are today, what happened in between there and here that made the difference, to the point where now you're helping couples break free from pornography? Like, I'm sure that's a wake-up call, but just because you realize what you stand to lose doesn't mean that you know how to keep it, and how to heal it and how to move forward. And then when those triggers happen, and the stress and the boredom and the loneliness or whatever triggers there are that go into that, what was different from before the ultimatum versus after, besides just the heightened awareness of what you stood to lose?
Yeah, I think I realized that she was serious. There was a lot of threats ahead of time that she wasn't going to handle it anymore, and she wasn't going to do it. And so when she laid down the ultimatum, I could just see in her eyes that she was serious. And the other thing is, she hit a point, and you can speak to this probably, but where she couldn't even do it anymore. She had to worry about herself. She couldn't take care of me.
All right. And I had, before the Duluth trip, I had put myself into counseling because I was starting interiorly. I was like, I'm reeling out of control here. Like, emotionally, I'm not even able to put on a happy face anymore. And it was what I was becoming interiorly, and just the guilt and nowhere to go, nobody to talk to listen to me, to that level that I needed to be heard. With all the support community that I had and the family, I just didn't feel understood completely. And so I put myself into counseling, and we did counseling, or I continued to do counseling. I invited him, and he would come and listen. After Retrovive, we continued doing counseling, and then he would input and give some feedback. And we continued to grow in that. But then during some of the post sessions, Retrovive really helped me realize what treatment was inappropriate, and how I was being treated like a doormat, like exactly what you were saying. It really opened my eyes to like how much of a doormat I was, and I was allowing myself to be, and that it wasn't okay. And there was a community out there that knew that it wasn't okay. And so I wasn't going crazy. I wasn't being overly needy. I wasn't demanding too much. This was realistic.
Yeah.
And so it spoke to my heart, and it kind of gave me an impetus to push me forward, and an accountability for us to lean back on. So when things would get better and then wouldn't get better, and then we'd fight like we would, I just told him, like, I can't handle this anymore, and I quit. I'm not going to counseling with you anymore. I'm done, and I want you to leave. I quit. I don't care. And I think at that point I was like, yeah, this isn't happening. And in fact, when we did put Paul VI, it was more like a trial, because I informed him that I had a girlfriend on speed dial in case anything was to happen, because I was not putting up with anything on that trip. So that was very good. I was open to healing. It just, there were so many deep-seated wounds that I thought I had been giving over to Christ, and giving to the Lord. I just didn't realize to the depth that they were seated. And I just didn't have the tools to deal with them. And then when repercussions would come, it would just send me right back to where I had been. And even though Brandon was in a better place, I wasn't.
Yeah.
I had to work through every layer. And sometimes it was really frustrating for me because sometimes I felt like I was being unjust. Because why am I still struggling with this? And I eventually, as Brandon kept doing things to prove to me that what he was doing was sincere, he continued counseling. Because he's like, I'm not leaving. I'm going to keep going to counseling. And I'm like, I don't care what you do. And don't talk to me about it. But every week I would see him get in the car and say, bye, honey, love you. I'm going to counseling. You know, that softened my heart over time. Mm-hmm. Not too quickly, though. It took a long time. And Brandon did ask me, he's like, you know, how long is this going to take? You know, because he was striving for this happiness and this joy in our relationship. And I'm like, I don't know. So I ended up going back to counseling with him. And we asked our counselor, like, how long is this going to take? I can't seem to control this. When a trigger happens or connects back to a wound of what we experienced in the past, it's like I'm back there. Yeah. And I'm usually not a vengeful person, and I'm usually a very happy person. I'm like, I can't get out of it. I feel like I'm right back there again. And so that's when he turned like trauma, the stress trauma, and like a PTSD. Yeah. He's like, sounds like an emotional PTSD. You're back there, you can't get out. I'm like, exactly. I'm like, how long is this going to take? And he goes, as long as it takes.
Yeah, and so that was really an eye-opener for me, too. It really forced me to have to recognize that what she was experiencing was real. You know, that betrayal trauma is real. And to even validate that what she was feeling was okay. Because she had been through a lot of hurt, you know. She had been through an emotional car wreck, and she was experiencing trauma and in flashbacks to that trauma. And so I had to focus on myself because we were emotionally distant, spiritually distant, physically distant. And the only thing I could do was change myself. I couldn't change her. I had done a lot of damage. And so I really just focused on growing my prayer life. I went through a program called Exodus 90. And that was intense, but that was something that really, really changed my life and allowed me to become more disciplined in many different areas, you know, and it took away I love how it's based in Exodus, you know, because I realized I was in so much bondage, you know, in trying to control things, and I was emotionally unstable, and I was, you know, struggling with lust. I wasn't struggling with pornography at that point, but I was still struggling with the temptations and everything. And so by taking away all of the aesthetic things that I'm used to, you know, like my phone, computer, snacking whenever I want to, everything like that, it really made me focus and rely on the Lord for my strength, which ultimately allowed me to be a better leader and a better husband for my wife. And yeah, I did continue counseling because I had, for lack of a better term, poo-pooed it for a long time, thinking that we didn't need counseling, you know, we can, you know, just that tough guy mentality, which is a total facade. You know, when I did start going to counseling, I realized that this is a great gift because I can actually learn how to process these emotions in a constructive way instead of, you know, just a volcano blowing up and then, you know, or a grenade going off and then, you know, you're left to pick up the pieces and the shrapnel of wherever it was going. And the trouble was, you know, Tonia and I were in the foxhole together, and I was unleashing a grenade right next to her. You know, so it was friendly fire. And so I just, as I continued to work on personal growth, that really was the key. And recognizing that if we hit that point again, that ultimatum still stood, you know, that this could very well end. And so, unfortunately, it took hitting that and realizing that she was serious before I really stepped up and participated in fully in counseling and different things for personal and spiritual growth. I really lived out the do. You know, that's one of the important things that we learned in Retrify is, you know, there's a desire and that's really great. But the do, the action step is really where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I think one of the points I noticed as you guys were speaking that it's almost as if you went your own ways finally, in terms of your own healing journey. Because I think a lot of times if the husband's struggling with it, the wife makes the husband the project. You know, I've got to fix him and change him and put up with him and then forgive him and then scream at him, and that it's all him. Well, in reality, like, she's not getting anything. Like, she's not getting any treatment. She's not focusing on self-care. She's not mending her own wounds. She's so focused on getting his wounds to stop wounding her that she's not taking the boundaries that are needed in order to preserve her own heart, you know. And she might struggle with, like, well, if I forgive him, isn't that like kind of invalidating everything that he's done to me, that I just keep letting it go? But I think that turn inward, in a sense of, like, I need to deal with my own stuff at this point. You know, like you mentioned the PTSD. I mean, what this really is it's complex PTSD, because a lot of times PTSD is like you get in a car accident, I'm traumatized by that one event. But this is like being in a car accident every month for 5 years. You know, it's a complex thing, and your body kind of keeps the score of that, of all the tension all stored up and the mistrust. And so the slightest thing happens, and then boom, it's like you're stepping on a landmine. And like at that point, you just got to go to your own corners of the boxing ring, so to speak, of just like, okay, you go over there, get some healing, you go over there. Because until then, there's just going to be too much brokenness and dysfunction. You're both kind of living out of your own wounds at that point. So, you know, what would you advise for someone if they're wrestling with this now? I'm going to put Retrovial in the show notes. I'll even put the link to Pope Paul VI Institute for Human Reproduction, also NAPRO Technology. You know, if there's couples listening to this struggle with infertility, they're awesome. But like, let's say there's a couple in the midst of this, or just a wife maybe. You know, how does she know who to trust? Like, how does she stay connected with her faith community when she's kind of embarrassed of just like, well, I'm in this nice little moms group of all these Christian moms, and they're wonderful human beings. But if I like, oh, hey, you know, my husband's a full-blown porn addict, and we're like an inch away from a divorce, it's just like, well, that's just going to bring all the shame on our family. So, you know, good advice would you give to people that find themselves, you know, in that really tough, darkest of times?
Sure. And that is a tough, very tough place to be, because there's such a stigma. And it's not that, I mean, more couples than you think are struggling with it, but not everybody does. And the other thing that happens is when it does come up, people can just stare at you. They don't know what to do. They don't know what to say. And something like that had come up in one of the groups that we were in. We, you know, just kind of testing it out, and it kind of fell flat. They didn't know what to do. Yeah. And they wanted to support us. They just didn't know how. And they were at a total loss. So we didn't get a lot of support there in that way. So for us, finding a good Catholic counselor or a Christian counselor that sees marriage as a beautiful thing to hold together, and to not just trash fast, you know, lose it and move on, that will try to help you. If you can find a Retrovive program near you, that's huge. Do you have recommendations that...
Yeah, I would just, you know, the Retrovi thing, everybody who has gone through Retrovi knows what it's like to be in a very tough situation, almost losing your marriage, you know, that, and so it provides an opportunity to come together, even if you haven't seen each other. You know, you walk in the same room and there's a camaraderie that exists because you've been in the muck. And so I think finding a group, maybe it's a family member or something like that, or just a good friends group who you can be honest with and say, listen, we're really struggling and things are really, really bad. And not everybody has that, and that's unfortunate. But, you know, it really needs to be something that we all seek out. And the other thing is, you know, one of the biggest things that helped me was getting accountability in my life. You know, I used Covenant Eyes, and by the grace of God, He works in mysterious ways. I now work for Covenant Eyes, long before any healing or anything had taken place. You know, I was using Covenant Eyes, and I really had to focus on engaging in that relationship with my accountability partner or ally. And so, you know, I switched allies, and I found an ally who I could share anything and everything with, because I knew what he was going to see on the reports, you know, and I also needed an ally who wasn't afraid to challenge me. And so that would be another recommendation if there's a husband out there struggling, find somebody who you can trust and who you can go deep with. Because surface level conversation, how are you doing? I'm doing good. Okay. Or, hey, I see you're struggling. Yeah, I'll get back up. I'll get to confession. It doesn't work, because you're not getting into the triggers or, what was happening. Are you having a tough time right now? How can I help? Stuff like that. You just got to be able to find people in your life who you can trust with the muck. And it's not always easy, but it really is a key to success because we can't do it alone. We tried for several years, which is why we ended up in Retrovai, which is why we ended up in an ultimatum situation. When we reached out for help through counselor, through Retrovai, through me getting a good ally, it really started to be the game changers.
Now, along the way, it's kind of a strange question, but did you guys hear any like really stupid advice along the way in terms of like how you need to fix this problem? Anything from just like, well, now Tonia, maybe this is happening because you're just not available enough to him, or maybe you just need to bring some porn into the bedroom and just watch it with him and just loosen up a little bit. Like, I don't know if you heard any of that garbage, or like for people out there who might be receiving dumb advice when they don't feel like they can turn to a lot of people, and then they finally turn to someone, a neighbor, or they get online and look for help, and they think, okay, well, maybe I should try that. Can you maybe diffuse some of those bombs of like, don't even try that because that is just dumb advice?
Yes, all of that is very dumb advice. Don't do any of it. It won't solve it. Sometimes, initially coming into it, I think I did a lot of my own, like you said, searching on the internet. What do you do? And, I was a virgin when we got married, and I knew how sex worked. I knew how that worked just from a theology of the body standpoint. And, so I knew how all that went, but when it kind of came to like spicing up the bedroom, I think indirectly and not intentionally, I was becoming his porn. And, I was finding online all these things to try, all these, romantic things to set up and, impress him when he comes in the door. Like, I did so many things to basically, in a sense, compete. Because I'm like, you know what, I can do this. I can outdo somebody online. I mean, big whoop. They can't be that great. And we had a very, very active sex life initially because I think I was competing with it. So I kind of did that stuff to myself. I had heard a little bit about the being careful about which counselor you got because I had somebody, a good friend, tell me that they had been recommended to watch porn with their husband, and that they had tried it and it wasn't good. It made things worse. So I was aware of that as well. And also, it just didn't seem like a very good idea in general. So I didn't. So I would say not so much bad advice, but simplistic advice. Responses like, well, all men struggle with it, and that's it. So that helped. No, that didn't help. Or things like, well, it was a bad decision. You need to just decide not to do it. And I used that on Brandon. I was like, well, just don't do it. When I have something that's like bad like that, I just decide not to do it and I quit.
Yeah,
and
it never occurred to me before.
Just stop. And I was just thinking it would be like that next beer. Just don't have that next beer. I was still thinking about it like in a very simplistic way. Yeah. Everybody struggles with it, and it's simply to choose not to do it. And that's just not what it was. And I was very impatient with how long this was going to take. So I would say the advice given was well meant, but it was too simplistic for the problem at hand, and nobody really knew how to deal with it.
And I would say that even louder than that was what wasn't said, that there really just was not a lot of help available. And when we did bring it up, like she said, we kind of got blank stares. And so that was also really challenging of not knowing where to turn. And thanks be to God, Retrovai came into our diocese. But, without something like that, without a marriage intensive or anything, I don't know where we would be. because there just was not a lot of help. And I love the church, right? I'm Catholic. I'm proud to be Catholic, but even in the church, there's not a lot of help. You know, you go to the confessional and you get advice like she said, don't do it. Stop looking at it. You know, I was told by one priest that, in a way you're out of control. You can't control yourself. So it's okay for you to continue to receive communion while you're struggling through this. And and competing advice. So you'd get one priest that would say one thing and another priest that would say another thing. And so it's like, the water was so muddy in this whole thing that, that not knowing or not hearing good advice or not, having anywhere to turn to for 4 years really was a huge struggle.
Yeah, and I'm going to put in the show notes just to help people that are listening to know where they can go for good support. CatholicTherapists.com is a good place to go. You type in your zip code, it'll pull up who's local. I mean, obviously, you can't endorse everybody that's on, thousands of therapists on there, but you're a lot more likely to find a solid one there than just flipping through, an internet search locally. And then also the John Paul II Center for Healing in Tallahassee, Florida. Dr. Bob Schutz, they've got healing retreats that people could go on. And then Dr. Peter Kloponis does Skype, like Zoom counseling. So maybe if you don't live near someone, he's a great counselor that you can get in touch with for one-on-one counseling, especially for the guys on learning how to break free from pornography, because he's got to do his heavy lifting as guy. I mean, it's one thing to say you're sorry, but it's like, okay, well, talk is like just really cheap, and so I think a lot of times women can't have their hope restored until they see, okay, he's doing something. He's actually, I can put up with a little slip up, maybe it's going to hurt a lot, but if I know that, okay, they're happening less frequently and his intervention is happening more frequently, we're trending in the right direction, as opposed to just these cyclical slip-ups with the crocodile tears and then back to the same old garbage. That's just a recipe for despair, and then at that point, just kind of throw in the towel. But if we have these resources, I'll put them in the show notes. And then before we close, I know you guys have a resource now that, God's led you to develop through Covenant Eyes of restored vows. Like, what is that? And how would that work for couples if they want to try that out?
Yeah, so we worked with probably over the past 6 months with Covenant Eyes to develop and share our story. So what we've been talking about here, we put that together into a 14-day video series and unpacked it day by day, going through the things like my exposure and the betrayal trauma, talking about boundaries. Boundaries are really important in this. And we go through that and some boundaries that can be set up to say, okay, this behavior is not okay, and there are consequences for that behavior if it happens. And so, and also, like the importance of counseling, things like that. And really, what we wanted to do is we wanted it to be a message of hope that even though you might be struggling immensely in marriage, as long as there's life, there's hope. And yeah, it's not going to be an easy journey, but if you're willing to do the work, you can find healing and forgiveness and renewal. And so we just put that together. It's a free 14-day video series. You receive an email with a link to a video every day, which goes through a different part of our story. And it has some discussion questions to talk through each day, because we also want it to be an opportunity to begin the healing. Now, we're not fools in thinking that 14 days is going to be the fix, right? We go through this 14 days, our marriage is going to be great. No, we've been on the healing journey for 4 years, and we're still getting deeper levels of healing as we continue forward each day. So, it took 4 years to get this way. It's going to take how many years, and probably even longer, because of the level of hurt and the woundedness, to be able to hit a point of healing. And so having these discussion questions to think about different things each day is really important as well. And we're hoping just kind of opens up the opportunity to begin to talk and begin to communicate and work through some of these issues. Now, we highly encourage, if anything is getting, because it can be really sensitive topics, we don't want to start a firestorm. And so we do encourage, if things are getting difficult, to continue the conversation with a good counselor, maybe like a CSAT or something like that, a certified sex addiction therapist who deals with this stuff. And again, I would highly encourage a good Catholic or Christian one because they're going to lead you in the right direction as far as marriage goes. And the other thing is that there's a scripture verse to reflect on each day, because ultimately, we would not be where we are without God's grace and mercy. We could have all the tools in the world, but if we don't have God and we didn't completely surrender to Him, it's not worth it. It'd be worth nothing, because there's no foundation we were building. And because we took the time to build that foundation in Christ, He took us from our lowest points and brought us up to where we are now. So that's really the gift. It's free, which is awesome as well. And it comes with a free 30-day trial of Covenant Eyes accountability software, because it just kind of goes back to this idea from Proverbs 27, right? Iron sharpens iron, and one man sharpens another. We can't do it alone, especially as guys. We need brothers, we need allies, we need accountability. Jesus sent them out 2 by 2 for a reason. I'm quite convinced of that, to help each other up, to work with each other. And so I think the same thing can be said of this. So this is just an opportunity for couples to go through, to begin the conversation, to get the tools and resources like Retrovai or other marriage intensive like accountability software, to begin that journey to healing. And again, I'll reiterate this because it's so important. It's going to take work. And so in all of this, you have to be willing to do the oftentimes hard work, and you're going to go through the feelings and the emotions, and they're going to be hard, but they have to be brought to the light so Jesus can heal them.
Yeah, no, I love the fact that the couples can do this thing together, because I think it's so important for, if the man's the one who's struggling, for him to hear the importance of boundaries that need to be set, because they say boundaries without consequences are just a form of nagging. And so sometimes I feel like a wife will want to be like, okay, this is the last time. That's an ultimatum. No, now this is the really last time. It's the really, 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 really last time. And all she's teaching him is that, like, wow, I can get away with this until the cows come home, And so she needs to be reinforced too, of just like, your words have to have teeth on them. Like, when you say this is the last straw, there can't be 12 more straws in the box. Obviously there's a place for mercy, but like, there's boundaries, and I think she needs coaching in those things, instead of thinking that, oh, well, you're the one who's imploding this marriage because you're not willing to try anymore and you're not willing to forgive anymore, and so it's your fault if things are heading south. So, Tonia, before we wrap up, any last thoughts in terms of what the program might be able to offer the spouses who are struggling with this?
Sure. I think exactly what you said, kind of a validation of this hurts, and it's not okay. It's not okay. And it's okay for women to feel what they're feeling, a sense of being betrayed, and the guilt, the cyclone of guilt you get caught up in. You think you're not enough. It's just a struggle. He'll figure it out on his own. It's just a cyclone of lies that you get caught up in, and especially for us wives who are striving to be that good little wife, that biblical wife. That somehow we get sometimes a trick in our head that biblical wife got walked all over. No, she doesn't. She's been redeemed. She's redeemed. And in that, we are beautiful daughters of Christ, and we desire love, and we were created for love, and we're created for that reinforcement from our husbands, that to be loved in a pure, chaste way. It doesn't stop after your marriage. It should still be pursued. And then just calling something interiorly as a wife. I guess I think of it like in a sense of like a shield maiden, rising to that and being like, nope, this is the shield. It doesn't go past this shield. That's it. There's a wall up here, not necessarily psychologically or emotionally, but just like, okay, before you shove that bomb off, just know that this is what's going to hit. It's not okay. And we're serious now. I mean, this is not a playtime. So yes, just really validating the woman's perspective, but then also coming to know more about what then addiction looks like, what that struggle is. In a sense, he's my husband, but he's also my brother in Christ. So how do I help facilitate healing to whatever extent I'm being called? But then knowing that I can't fix him, I can't change him. That change and that fix has to come interiorly from him to the Lord, and it needs to be personal. And it's not about what I do necessarily. And so just really speaking to that. For me, doing the whole video series and just what the impetus was for that. Brandon brought it up, and I was like, okay, sure. God will get what God wants, and I'm okay with being an instrument. But it was hard to go back and do it. There was a lot of pain. It took a long time to go back and do it. And so it was a new level of healing that we reached in doing it. And it's more than what we had when we were going through it. Yeah. And having this 14-day program to give to couples, I'm so humbled that the Lord would use that to potentially help other couples. And like I said, give them something that we didn't have.
It's very real and raw, I would just add, and the other thing is we're just an ordinary couple. You talked at the beginning about how many emails you get from married couples who are struggling. We're one of those couples, and by the grace of God, he's using us as instruments to share our story so that we can help others. And so I know you're going to share the link probably in the show notes to it, but if couples listening want to join quick and easy right away, they can just text the word vows to 66866. So vows to 66866. There they can enter their email address and get signed up. And, I highly encourage, even if you're not struggling with it, you probably know somebody who is. So even using this as a tool to help others and going through it, I think is just really important.
Especially for those couples who, like I said, you bring it up in a group and they just stare at you. Yeah. Like inside they're like, what do we do? What do we say? Yeah. And we're like, they think we're terrible. We're awful people. We shouldn't have said anything. So there's like this nonverbals going on. So even if you're not struggling, watch it so you can help somebody else, maybe.
So often things are just so taboo, right? That there's things you don't talk about, except it needs to be talked about because it can't remain in the dark because that's where the shame is. And as long as there's shame and so much guilt and everything like that, there can never be the beginnings of healing. And so really we want to make this less taboo, not that we think it's okay, but we want to be able to talk about it and bring it into the light and have other couples so that they can help others and ultimately, heal in their own marriage if they're struggling.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can't express enough thanks for just your authenticity and openness and vulnerability of just putting it all out there for everybody, because it's really giving people a path forward because they're hearing these other ideas like we talked about earlier. Well, just try to compete with the porn. But, the way I look at it is like, dude, porn stars can't even compete with each other. I mean, it's not like a guy stays faithful to one link or one page or one person. It just trains him to go on to the next of this insatiable desire. And so I think a lot of people are running down all these rabbit trails that lead just ultimately nowhere. But I think, you kind of alluded to it best, Tonia, of just like, a woman is not created to be porn. She's created to be loved. And I think that's not only what she craves, I think it's how he wants to love her too. And just so that what you guys have mentioned today, there's so many resources. I mean, the show notes are going to be a bit long of all the different links that we promoted, but we're going to stick the one top of the Restored Vows so people can just click on that, and it's free. You try it out for 12 days. I'll also put Exodus 90 down there. They're one of the generous sponsors of this program, too. And one of the beautiful things I think Exodus 90 ties into this, they say that it's been said that the opposite of sobriety, when it comes to addiction, the opposite of sobriety, or the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is human connection. And I think that's one of the strengths of Exodus 90. It's not some like little Lone Ranger program. It's like you got to find a little band of brothers to do this thing with. And yeah, it's ascetical and it's demanding and it's going to purge and detox a lot of garbage from your life. But it's not just going to be the absence of, warm showers and the absence of TV and the absence of beer for 90 days. It's the presence of brotherhood that's going to fill that up and overflow the needs that these things were never able to meet. And so as a guy, make sure to check out exodus90.com. We'll have a link below. You can try that thing out for free. So I'll put that in the show notes. You guys, I cannot thank you enough just for being so open, so honest. And then Brandon, maybe before we close, could you offer prayer for all of the couples that might be watching this, or maybe not watching it together, maybe just one listening to this, knowing like, this is what I need. I want to get where they're at, and I know nobody's perfect, and I know we're not there until we get to heaven, but I just would like to get to finally to that phase where they're on the same page and they're both fighting for this thing together, and they're, they're just fiercely wanting to defend their marriage against everything that the devil wants to destroy it, into pieces. So Brandon, could you maybe just, before we wrap up, offer prayer for all those couples, even if one spouse is completely unwilling to even listen to this program because they don't want to hear it, just maybe offer prayer to pour some consolation and hope into those couples.
Yeah, absolutely. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Dear Lord, we thank you for this opportunity to come together today on the podcast and talk about the realness of life. You know, that there are struggles, that there are trials, and that there are many crosses we carry. Lord, those crosses are very heavy, and we know that there is a lot of damage that is done sometimes, especially with the cross of lust and pornography. And we just lay that before your feet. We ask that you help us to find healing if there is struggles with pornography, especially in marriage. There are so many tentacles that come along with that, Lord, and so many knots. And so we just want to pray to you, Mama Mary, you who undo the knots so well, to undo those knots, especially if there's a hardness of heart when it comes to admitting that there's a problem here, or admitting that help is needed, or even admitting that we are not loving as completely as we can. We just offer this to you, as well as any of the couples listening who are struggling with pornography in their marriage, that they might find restored vows as a message of hope and healing, but ultimately that they might find you, Mom, and that they might find you, Jesus, as their source of ultimate consolation. We lay all this at your feet, Jesus, through our Mama, as we pray, Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen. Well, thank you for that. It's a beautiful image of Our Lady, undoer of knots, in that prayer, because as you were saying, I was just imagining, somebody who doesn't want to let go of pornography in their life and just almost fiercely defending the attachment that they formed to it, almost being like a person who's suffered a deep wound, can't imagine life without their crutch. And because there's that deep underlying wound, it just seems like this thing they have to lean on for sustenance and survival. But, Our Lady can go deeper beyond the crutch. The crutch ultimately isn't the problem. The ultimate problem is that wound. And once that's healed, they're not going to feel a need to defend this thing that's going to slow them down in the long run. What's needed is that profound healing. And so I just want to thank you guys for the gift of healing that you are to the church. And I just ask all our listeners to pray for you guys and your marriage, and for the protection of your sacrament, of your family, of your little girl, because of all the good work that you're going to be doing for the church. We know you're putting a target on your back, but should have a target on your back. As I see it, if you don't have a target on your back, it means you're either already taken out by the enemy, or he just doesn't see you as a threat. And so bless you guys. Be under Our Lady's mantle. And again, thank you for coming on.
Thank you, Jason. We really appreciate it.